So, you have a thing for mushrooms, spores, and fungal entities. Don't worry, me too. But maybe you want to take that thing and turn it into a D&D character by creating a bearer and spreader of mycelial majesty. Well, there's a subclass for that in 5e. Let's discuss the Circle of Spores Druid. Hi there, I'm just a second level fighter who likes talking about Dungeons and Dragons, and if you like mushrooms, you should consider hitting the subscribe button, or checking out some of the other content on my channel. But enough about that, because today we're going over a really weird one. The Circle of Spores was originally introduced in the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica, and then later revised with some minor changes in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, and it unashamedly wears its inspiration on its sleeves, and in its clothes, and hair, and just generally in the air in its immediate vicinity. You see, the Spores Druid is all about the cycle of life and death, and how death may be the end of one entity but the beginning of another. There is absolutely beauty in decay, even if it isn't always pretty. However, if you think mushrooms look cute, then pretty is an irrelevant concept. I'll go ahead and say it, this is the Druid subclass with the most striking visual theme. But we have a few strange mechanical conundrums here. The Spores Druid suffers from a slight mechanical identity crisis. The features feel a bit random. Regardless, this is a weird and wonderful subclass, so let's dive straight in. I'll also quickly mention that I've included my take on building one of these all the way up until level 20 at the end of the video. We're going to start off with the level 3 features, of which there are 3. And yeah, this is an old subclass and it used to get these at 2nd level, but the 2024 Player's Handbook only gives you subclass access at 3rd level. Anyway, we get a list of spells that are always prepared. The thematic through line here is incredibly strong with a general decay vibe going on. Everything is either necromantic or poison adjacent. But with a bit of imagination, it can all be flavored as being caused by the clouds of spores that cling to our little mushroom mancer. Chill Touch is a solid cantrip to have, but options like Blight, Cloudkill, and Contagion are all kind of held back by relying on a Constitution saving throw. Then Gentle Repose and Gaseous Form are very flavorful considering the theme. We're just hosts after all, waiting to release the mycelial miasma onto some poor unsuspecting fools. I think Animate Dead is the standout here though, and you can do a lot of interesting things with it by raising a small militia of fungal thralls. It isn't something druids usually get access to, and it's always fun to play around with, especially since the inherent sinister overtones are kinda removed with the spore theme we have. The callous disregard for emotional attachment is still very much there though. NPCs do tend to get upset when you parade their deceased loved ones around like dolls, even if they are covered in adorable little spore mounds and mushrooms. Then we have Halo of Spores. I think this was intended to be the core feature of the subclass, but it exists in a very weird space. Your druid is constantly surrounded by a 10-foot aura of spores. If any creature enters the aura or starts their turn there, you can spend your reaction to deal some necrotic damage to them if they fail a constitution saving throw. If they succeed, however, nothing happens. The damage scales up from 1d4 to a 1d10 when you reach 14th level, which isn't particularly amazing. Yeah, this feature isn't very good on its own, and I wouldn't recommend wasting your reaction on it. If it dealt half damage, then sure, rock it out whenever possible, but for whatever reason, that wasn't how it was designed. It might also be a bit better if it actually poisoned the target, but it doesn't do that either. Finally, we have Symbiotic Entity. Now, this feature is legitimately strong, but also somewhat misleading. Anyhow, you can use your action to spend a use of Wild Shape to temporarily supercharge your spores. For the duration of the effect, you gain temporary hit points equal to 4 times your level, which as a side note is more than what Moon Druids get from using Wild Shape. You also deal double damage with your Halo of Spores feature, and your melee weapon attacks deal an extra 1d6 necrotic damage. This feature lasts 10 minutes or until you no longer have any temporary hit points remaining from it. Okay, firstly, doubling the damage from Halo of Spores does not make it even halfway decent. Let's get that out of the way. But the extra damage on weapon attacks kinda misled a lot of players when this subclass was first released. There has always been a yearning for a druid that can fit into the warrior playstyle without relying on wild shape like the Moon Druid. So yeah, any tiny amount of support for that got immediately jumped on. However, that d6 never scales and actually hides the true power of this feature, that being the temporary hit points. 4 times your level gets out of control very quickly, and there really aren't many other player options that can give as many for such a low cost. The changes in the 2024 PHB to the Druid also kind of help this stand out. Wild Shape uses are abundant now, and it gets to the point where you can just trade spell slots for them. The Moon Druid got their infinite health pool nerfed into the ground, but the Spores Druid is still very much a problem to remove from the battlefield, just like a finely aged fungus. Moving on to level 6, we have Fungal Infestation. This feature allows you to use your spores to create a zombie whenever a small or medium beast or humanoid expires within 10 feet of you. Once again, you have to use your reaction to do so, and the zombie spawns with only 1 hit point and lasts an hour. You can use this feature a number of times equal to your wisdom modifier though. Now, this feature is hugely underwhelming. It only ever uses the zombie stat block, which at this point has very little value, and I doubt the new monster manual is going to change that. Zombies can sometimes just not die if they roll well, but they suck at attacking anything, and you really can't rely on a die roll to keep them going. But I mean, if you want to make some fun, guys, then go ahead. It's a very cool role-playing feature. 10th level gives us Spreading Spores, another attempt at making Halo of Spores halfway decent. This feature lets you concentrate your spores and use a bonus action to throw them out to 30 feet. They coalesce in a 10-foot cube and wait for a big stupid enemy to run through the dusty fun cloud. You no longer have to spend your reaction to deal damage to creatures with your Halo of Spores. Instead, any creature that moves into the cube or starts their turn there will have to make their con save or take the damage. This effect lasts for 1 minute or until you use this bonus action again. Also, while it's out, you can't use your Halo of Spores in the normal way at all. So yeah, no more reaction, but you can still deal 0 damage with it. Yes, you are most likely going to actually use it now, but it still isn't amazing. I genuinely don't understand why druids have to be the class that has an abundance of effects that don't deal half damage on successful saves. It's just kind of annoying. Finally, at level 14, we get our capstone feature, Fungal Body. This one is real simple and real strong. Your little Mushroom-mancer can no longer be blinded, deafened, frightened, or poisoned, and if you are hit with a critical hit, it counts as a normal hit. This all applies so long as you aren't incapacitated. There are very few features that allow player characters to completely ignore critical hits, and yeah, it won't be impactful all the time, but it's an awesome little feature to have. The fact that you can ignore the blinded condition also has more implications than you might consider at first. You can see in the dark, magical or otherwise, as well as areas that are considered heavily obscured, as the 2024 PHB now just gives you the blinded condition while trying to see into those areas. This is a weird capstone, but it's cool that you embrace the spores fully. Okay, so now that we've covered the features this subclass provides, what exactly is it trying to do? I'm not entirely sure. It's a bit all over the place. However, we can't deny that it has an exceptionally strong flavor and theme. It isn't really the answer to the mythical and elusive Druid Warrior subclass, and it definitely isn't an amazing summoner unless zombies and skeletons are your jam. But it is an absolute unit when it comes to tankiness. This subclass can take more of a beating than the vast majority of player options in 5e if you dedicate the resources to achieving that by trading spell slots and actions for temporary hit points. It does what the old Moon Druid did, and there's a lot of weird value in that. You can absolutely lean into the Druidic Warrior theme with some tinkering, and that's exactly what we're going to try to achieve, but I think this subclass is also great if just played as a really durable spellcaster with some interesting options available. Anyhow, let's cover a few general Druid tidbits to keep in mind. Of course, as a Druid, you have a d8 hit die and are not incredibly tanky. You also get training with light armor and shields, and you can expand on that later with a specific feature. However, the spores provide you with an exceptional level of chunkiness, so all of this isn't too consequential. Druids are wisdom-based spellcasters, and they get access to some of the most unique spells. They aren't as blasty as a wizard or as supportive as a cleric, but they have some amazing exploration options as well as some crazy and problematic ones too. The 2024 PHB gave us some additional choices to make when constructing our druids with the Primal Order feature. You can tech into medium armor and martial weapons, or you can be more skill focused. I'd suggest trying to go down the warrior route, and this can be expanded upon later by buffing up either your weapon attacks or cantrip damage. Finally, druids have wild shape and can turn into animals. You will be spending the same resource on your symbiotic entity feature, but that doesn't mean you can't run around as a squirrel every now and then. Wild shape uses are also very accessible nowadays, so don't be afraid to use them. So, usually as a druid, your average gameplay pattern revolves around having a devastating concentration spell up and then filling out the rest of your action economy with cantrips or attacks, and that's no different here. What I think we try to do here with the Spores Druid, if we are trying to be a bit more warrior-like, is keep Shillelagh up and combine it with whatever is most disruptive and requires concentration. Of course, you can't just be a full-on spellcaster, but they've thrown us a bone here, so let's see where it goes. I will just quickly mention that if you want a better version of Halo of Spores, then cast Conjure Woodland Beings when you get access to it and flavor the spirits as floating wibbly wobblies. The spell slaps and has roughly the same area of effect. Anyway, if you are looking to hit things with a wooden people opener, druids get access to Conjure Minor Elementals and Fount of Moonlight. One of these is not like the other, by the way, but both will just add some dice to your attacks. You only get a single attack by default though, so keep that in mind. However, there is a level of upcasting where Conjure Minor Elementals just overcomes that through sheer dumb brute force, whose balanced game design was not factored into its creation whatsoever. Guardian of Nature from Xanathar's Guide to Everything is another interesting weapon buffing spell. It deals significantly less damage than the other two, but it also has some other interesting effects. But yeah, they are a bit anti-synergistic with Shillelagh and the temporary hit points you get from Symbiotic Entity. Still worth a mention though. As you can see, there isn't exactly much to go on here to buff up your single attack to keep it in line with a true martial class, unless you look outside of the confines of the Druid chassis, but we'll cover that a bit later. Let's talk feats. Here you're going to need to figure out what playstyle you're going for. If you're trying the warrior route, well, you might not be doing the same thing as fighters and barbarians and whatnot because of the single attack limitation, but your choices will also differ from a pure spellcaster. Anyway, I think Inspiring Leader is a great option to flavorfully spread your spores to your party members without them noticing, very subtly dishing out some temporary hit points, similarly to how you empower yourself. Warcaster is a decent option if you're going to pick up a stick and shield. It allows you to perform somatic components with a shield in your hand and gives you advantage on concentration checks. However, it also allows you to cast spells as opportunity attacks, and if you weren't aware, allies also trigger them when moving out of your reach. So you can now use this feat to cast spells like Cure Wounds on them. Of course, you can also use it to hit enemies with cantrips or some of the heavy hitters from the Druid spell list. Resilient is the final word in concentration checks when you choose to gain proficiency in constitution saving throws with it, and druids have way too many concentration spells. Great for warriors and pure spellcasters alike. As for origin feats, tough is very tempting for such a tanky druid. Magic Initiate, despite what it may look like, is actually the best option if you're planning to head onto the front lines and bonk some people on the head with a fancy piece of wood. Dipping into the wizard spell list can give you True Strike, Booming Blade, or Green Flame Blade, as well as bangers like the Shield spell. Then Healer is a decent option here. Druids get access to a fair few healing spells, and you can use this feat to just be better at using them. For species, take whatever option you like. The mushrooms and spores are the stars of the show here after all, but as two gimmicky suggestions, I've picked out the Goliath and the Warforged today. Goliaths are simply awesome and give a bunch of features from growing bigger to having a pseudo-smite ability that can deal extra damage or knock enemies prone. Obviously, this is here because you can add a d10 to your damage pretty frequently. If you're looking for some tie-in, maybe your ancestors were fungal giants, or giant mushroom farmers. Who knows? Alternatively, we have the Warforged. These awakened automatons get an extra point to their armor class and don't need as much attention to keep alive with things like eating, breathing, or sleeping, similar to the wonderful world of fungus and mold. They also finish long rests in 6 hours, which is nice. For this one, perhaps you're just a lifeless shell being animated by a colony of magical mushrooms. The will of the spore made manifest, a mycelial messenger. As for multiclassing, I'm going to cover a few options that might make you a better warrior and drive you closer to that nature-gish idea that seemingly doesn't exist for druids. Straight up, just take a level of paladin for access to weapon masteries and divine smite. Now, this might sound like an outlandish suggestion if you've been playing 5e for a while. However, the 2024 PHB changed Divine Smite into a spell. The spell itself can be upcast, and while paladins only get access to 5th level spell slots, pure spellcasters can do better. So yeah, use this to deal a bunch of damage and pretend that druid warriors are a legitimate thing. Let the spores be your god and spread the good word by spending your highest level spell slots on a 1st level spell. Another decent option that actually sounds more traditional is the War Domain Cleric. They have a feature that lets them make a weapon attack as a bonus action, and the amount of times they can use it scales off of wisdom. This is like a pseudo extra attack that brings you closer to a real warrior. However, clerics get some great spells to help and dish out some punishment too. Then, the thematic combination of Spores Druid and Swarmkeeper Ranger cannot be denied. Your swarm is just a cloud of spores. Rangers also give some great options for a druid, and if you're willing to put in 5 levels, you will get access to extra attack. That is a big investment, and the outcome may not be the strongest, but the roleplay potential here is amazing. The time has come to build a mushroom warrior worthy of the fungal boons and moldy gifts. I've chosen to try my best to lean into the melee nature warden theme here, and it has led to an interesting choice. Anyway, we're going to start out as a Goliath and choose fire as our giant ancestry so we can add 1d10 fire damage to our attacks every now and then. We're using the standard array to get 15 wisdom, 14 constitution, 13 charisma, which will become relevant later on, and a 12 in dexterity. Strength and intelligence are inconsequential to us here, as we will be using Shillelagh to solely focus on wisdom. We're also going to be pumping Constitution. The +1 modifier to Dexterity is unfortunate, but the bonus to Medium Armor caps out at 2, so I don't think it's too much of a loss. We'll also be using a shield to make up for it. For our background, we're picking Sage and increasing our Wisdom by 2 and our Constitution by 1. We get the Magic Initiate Origin feat, and we have to choose from the Wizard spell list here, but that was kind of the point. We'll be taking Booming Blade and Shield. The other cantrip is up to personal preference. As always, take whatever skills you like. Picking a specific background limits our choices, but the ability scores and origin feat were exactly what I was looking for here. Anyhow, at this point we'll be running around with a stick boosted up with Shillelagh, casting Booming Blade and bonking things with Reckless Abandon. As mentioned earlier in the video, cast whatever concentration spell is most disruptive or helpful. Carrying on with the choices we make, at levels 4 and 5 you can really swap these 2 points around. But after carrying on with Druid until level 3 and picking up the Spores subclass, we're going to either be taking our 4th level of Druid and picking up Warcasters to set our Wisdom to 18, or we're going to be taking a single level of Paladin to get access to Divine Smite and the Topple Weapon Mastery for Quarterstaffs. Let me quickly explain the Paladin dip here. Divine Smite can be upcast, and it's how we're going to juice our melee weapon damage. Paladins are also half-casters, and using the multi-class spellcasting rules, taking a single level won't hinder our spell slot progression at all. Also, 20th level as a druid is kind of underwhelming, and I really just want to make the warrior druid thing work here. Anyway, at 9th level we take an ASI to get +2 to wisdom, capping it out at 20. 13th level sees us take Resilient Constitution to get that sweet proficiency and ensure our concentration is almost never broken, as well as set our Constitution score to 16. At level 17, we will take another ASI to boost our Constitution to 18. At this point, we have a bunch of hit points and will be unreasonably tanky. Finally, for our epic boon choice, we're going with the Boon of Combat Prowess, which lets us turn a missed attack into a hit once per turn. Since we only make one attack per turn, this basically gives us 100% accuracy. We also boost our Wisdom to 21, though that means very little here. Now I'll just show off a bit of the damage we can output with the simple combination of our Shillelagh, Divine Smite, Booming Blade, our extra Goliath damage, and the extra d6 from Symbiotic Entity. Obviously you could boost this higher by casting other spells, but we're assuming here that you just spend your highest available spell slot on Divine Smite. We're also assuming the attack hits, and we're ignoring any resistances, and we're also going to ignore any aftershock damage from Booming Blade. This is just White Room damage after all, and is solely for the sake of interest and seeing what happens when we achieve the thing we wanted to achieve. Note that if you do actually do this in a game, you will most likely have a concentration spell tearing things up, as well as your Halo of Spores or Spreading Spores features hopefully doing less than 0 damage. With that all said, let's take a look at our regular damage output at a few points in our Mushroom Warrior's adventuring career. At level 3, when we get our subclass, we would deal 16.5 damage on a normal hit and an impressive average of 30 points on a crit, which is nothing to sniff at this level. 5th level sees the damage output jump up to 41 on a normal and a massive 78 on a crit when Divine Smite is finally added into the mix. Level 11 is the next point of cantrip scaling, and here we deal 65.5 or 126 respectively. I will say that at this point we make actual Paladin Smite damage look like a joke because now we have better levels of spell slots. Finally, at level 20, where we are literally guaranteed to hit, we will deal 88.5 damage on average with a normal, and our crits deal a massive 172 damage, which is more than I was expecting, to be honest. I also just want to point out that the actual extra damage that our subclass contributes at any point is a tiny 3.5 necrotic damage on average, or double that for a crit. It's kinda sad when you only make a single attack and that's all you get to add per turn, but yeah, Divine Smite makes this playstyle somewhat possible. You're like a spellcasting rogue that is worse at ability checks but has way more utility. Alright, that was the Circle of Spores Druid. I underestimated how much the 2024 Player's Handbook changes meant for this subclass. I think it's actually great, assuming you don't fall down the trap of expecting it to be an amazing warrior or summoner. It is the uber tank of druid subclasses now, and that's just awesome. Anyway, if you've made it this far in the video, then you're a legend, and I really appreciate you. How would you build one of these things? I find that druids don't usually have a strong sense of direction, and you can just kinda do whatever you want with them, you know? But yeah, that'll do it for this one. Cheers.